Dr. Barry, licensed psychologist, and here we talk about psychology and true crime. And I wanted to talk about the case of Carlos Dominguez. He was charged with first degree capital M in the deaths of two individuals, and then also one victim survived. And the defense alleged that he has schizophrenia. He was undiagnosed at the time and not medicated. He is now medicated. And they had three experts, so three mental health experts, come in and testify. I was able to review the psychologist that assessed him in December of 2024. And then also there was a psychiatrist that assessed him. We are going to take a look because I think the psychiatrist testimony, it was amazing. It was really good and easy to follow and understand. And the psychologist, her testimony was really powerful as well. I only have a certain amount of time, so that's the part that we're going to take a look at. My heart goes out to the victims in this case. I will let you all know the jury was unable to come to a decision on second degree or any lesser charges. They did all agree that they found him not guilty of first degree. And one of the victims' family members felt like, because one of the victims was, so there was a knife involved that happened to them 52 times. And one of the victims' family members said that they felt like this was the 53rd stab. And so my heart truly does go out to them. The state is going to determine whether they are going to retry him or not. Another part that complicates this case is he is from El Salvador, and he testified in this case, and the testimony is available. I have links to the testimony down in the description because they went through his childhood history, him growing up in El Salvador. He reports a history of childhood essay by somebody that was babysitting him, a woman that was babysitting him when he was maybe 4 or 5 years old. And then he described his immigration process to the United States, where around 5 or 6 years old, as a very young child, his grandmother like sent him off with some people. They were in, I think, a raft. He could not swim. And he ended up getting detained because his mother and father were both in the United States. So his mother and father were both in the United States. He wasn't aware that he had had another sibling, but the defense was able to present a lot of his backstory, and so you can feel free to if you want to dig deeper into this case. But it really just is a heartbreaking case. Just because the state will have to determine where they go from here. The state seemed to believe that he was angry and that this was something that these random people just got caught in the midst of a rage, because the state is going to say that he was making these devil carvings in a tree. And he said, and I didn't see the carving, but he said it was like a diamond with some hearts. And so the state saw something clearly different than what he says it is. I don't know what it was one way or another. We only know what the jury kind of came to. I do want to play a little bit of his testimony. He's being asked questions by the defense because the expert, so he's been on medication for over a year, and you'll notice his affect is still very flat. When I say affect, I mean his emotional expression. He stays extremely flat. He doesn't really do a lot of facial expressions. He is on medication. He's on an antipsychotic, and he now understands that, yes, he does have schizophrenia. There was an issue with his competency to stand trial, and he did have to go to a state hospital to have his competency restored. And all the medical experts in this case did feel that he was in active psychosis at the time of this incident. Let me make myself smaller, and then we will watch some of his testimony. So he's describing, I believe this is the day of the incident, and he's starting to hear whispers and he's seeing shadows. And for the first time, the shadows seem to have these, like, they look like shadow people versus just a shadow. So he's describing visual hallucinations. That's what he's describing.
Do you recall if you went to the city log?
No.
At some point,
I apologize. There are not captions, so captions are not available on this video. Hopefully, on replay, the captions might be available.
did you ride? Do you recall riding past Central Park?
Yes.
Prior to riding past Central Park, had you seen the shadow figures in the distance during your ride?
No.
What happened when you passed Central Park? Or did you approach Central Park?
Yes.
What do you remember?
I just remember sitting down at a bench.
And do you recall specifically where you entered Central Park?
I think it was towards the northeast side by the firefighters.
And you recall sitting on a bench?
Yes.
And where was your bike, if you recall?
I don't recall.
And was it nighttime?
Yes.
Once you sit on a bench, what do you remember?
I remember I was looking at one of the trees and I started to hear clear voices. They were telling me, you won't go up to him, you won't go, you won't. And that's the first time I heard like actual voices, and I started to get paranoid.
So prior to hearing the voices, have you seen anyone or anything at the park?
No.
And you were staring at a tree.
Yes.
These voices that you heard, where you said, you won't go up to him, you won't. Is that what it was?
Yeah.
How were these voices different than the whispers you had heard?
Yeah, it was the first time that I could actually make out what the voices were saying.
And so when you heard that, how did you react?
I started to look around.
And let me also just clarify. So this incident happened, I believe he was 20 years old. He is now 22 years old. And yes, so and the victims in this case, it was 50-year-old David Breaux, 20-year-old Karim Najm, and 64-year-old Kimberlee Guillory. She survived. Um, and many of these individuals were unhoused and were sleeping on the park bench. We are going to take a look at a piece of the interrogation because the psychiatrist that assessed him is going to bring up the interrogation.
And then on the bench next to me, or the bench over it, I seen a shadow figure. And that's when I just felt my body like get up and lunge at him. And I kind of just like blank out.
Was the shadow figure that you saw on the same bench as you or a different bench?
A different bench.
And he now knows that shadow figure, that was a person. And he says his body got up and he lunged. Well, the individual there was a knife used multiple times. Okay. So I just wanted to play a little bit of that so you can get an idea of just kind of his, even on medication, his flat affect. I do have a link to the interrogation video. So they played this in court. I apologize now. The sound is bad. Okay. So yes, he is on. Let me remember. I think I put it in my notes. He is on Zyprexa. So he is medicated. He is on Zyprexa, and he's been diagnosed with schizophrenia. And schizophrenia has a age of onset between possibly 18 to 23 years old, sometimes as young as 17. But what's more common is late adolescence, so 18, 19, possibly 20. And 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 so that is and the state also said, even if he has schizophrenia, did he not understand that his actions were wrong? And it seems like the mental health experts did feel like he was in a state of active psychosis. We saw another case that was kind of where the experts seemed to think, yes, the person was delusional. Yes, they were in an active state, and the jury still found the individual guilty. The state will have to determine if they do retry this case to attempt to get a verdict on second degree. He's also still in custody, I believe. So I'm almost 100% positive that Carlos Dominguez is still in custody because if um, there was going to be a not guilty by reason of insanity portion. If he is found not guilty of everything, then they were going to present more mental health expert. I believe that was my understanding of how the proceedings go in California. I did not listen to every aspect of this. At the time of the incident, there was no substance use or abuse that I heard or was aware of. So this seems to be just straight schizophrenia psychosis. That's how this was presented. Let's take a look at the interrogation. There is a police officer, there's somebody, a detective or police officer, interrogating him in the blue. And Carlos has the long hair in the hoodie. Okay. You can tell he's gained some weight since being incarcerated and placed on medication. Weight gain is really common with antipsychotics. And the sound, I told y'all, the sound is so bad. There's a buzzing, and I don't think there's much I can do about it. Okay. So I will just try to bring my volume down a little while this is playing if I interrupt.
Sean, why's your blood on your sweatshirt? Is that from Monday night?
He said, "Why is there blood on your sweatshirt?"
So what's it from?
It's not for, like, I don't know, like,
So John, you realize that we're going to take a sample of your blood, of that blood that's on your sweatshirt? So who's that gonna be?
no one.
So who's, if you have blood on your sweatshirt, it has to be someone. So who's it gonna be? Is it gonna be the person at a tent? Is it gonna be her blood?
No.
Is it gonna be the person's blood here at Sycamore Park?
No.
Is it gonna be the person's blood from Central Park?
No.
So whose blood is it gonna be?
I'm not sure.
Who's gonna be? Is there another person that we don't know about?
No.
There's not?
No. No.
Are you telling me that because you know that there's not?
No, because there's, like, no.
Or because you haven't heard anybody yet?
No, like, I don't have anything.
Okay, so you're gonna tell me you didn't hurt these people? So you were standing outside this lady's tent and you didn't hurt her?
No.
So who hurt her then? If you're standing outside of her tent and she magically gets hurt? So you're standing out of her tent and she magically gets hurt. Is that what you're telling me?
Sir, at this point, have you ever?
All right, so I'm going to fast forward to 11 minutes. In the part that I'm fast forwarding past, The detective just mentions that they're going to swab, like they're going to get swabs and DNA and all fingerprints and all of that from him. Okay. So I'm going to fast forward a little bit further where he's going to be asked specific questions about what he was thinking and feeling at the time of the crime. And the detective, I think, is doing a good job trying to get some possible evidence. I don't know if they realize that this person is potentially in like a psychotic state. I don't know that the detective realized that. All right, let's keep it going.
Will I get an opportunity to talk to me, talk to us? You'd love to hear from you. Are you ready for that?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll start with Central Park. The guy on the bench. The picture I showed you earlier, I know you probably don't recognize him because you probably never saw his face, okay? What was he wearing that night?
I'm not sure.
What did he look like? What was, when you walked up to him on that bench, what were you thinking?
I don't know.
What were you feeling?
I'm not sure. It wasn't.
You were what?
It wasn't like feeling anything. Like I'm not sure.
All right. Tell me about what time it was.
Well, the time.
Yeah, what time of day? What time of night, I mean?
Like late. Like 10.
Okay. So there are other points during the interrogation where he is asked questions like, did you do this? Or is this what happened? He's asked leading questions. And at times he says yes. And then at times he says no. And the mental health expert is going to bring that up, that he seemed to want to be cooperative, but he also didn't seem to be all there during that state. Um, so he seems confused to me. Lisa, I agree. So it does seem like he is in an active psychotic state, and this isn't something that can be like easily faked, or that because also two different people. So a person can be psychotic and be very, they can be moving a lot, especially if they have schizoaffective disorder and they might be in a manic state. We saw that with a few other cases that we've talked about. He seems to be in this more lethargic, slowed, and he does seem to want to cooperate. I agree, Dominique, that he doesn't seem to really be fully aware of what's happening around him, and yet wanting to cooperate with them. Welcome, witness. Welcome, Jessica. Welcome to everybody watching. All right, so let's go on ahead. This is a psychiatrist that, like I said, I think she gives very powerful testimony explaining what's going on in a case like this. I'm going to make myself a little smaller. There we go. All right, so let's hop right into this part.
Why is it important to watch the videos as opposed to a summary of the report?
So a summary is just that. It is key points based on that recorder's interpretation of what happened. Whereas a video, I get to watch and see for myself. And as a mental health professional, there are things that I may pay attention to that whoever wrote that summary may not.
But having reviewed the report and the videos, did you notice anything unusual about a report summarizing the 7-hour interview?
Juxtaposing what I was able to see and observe versus the report, there are things I noticed that were very striking to me. The fact that there was no hand gestures for hours on end, that he barely shifted in his seat for hours on end. His affect, the way that he was just kind of staring ahead. Those are all things that were really important to me as a mental health professional as I watched the video. A lot of that wasn't reflected in the report.
And if you recall, did you review a report written by an author named Steve Ramos where he attributed statements that Mr. Reales Dominguez allegedly made in that video, which you didn't see in the video, or you didn't hear in the video?
Yes. So what I saw in the video was a lot of leading statements and closed-ended questions that Mr. Reales Dominguez may have said yes to, but then would contradict himself later or outright say, I didn't do it. And so what was in the summary didn't seem to reflect what I saw in the video in terms of his confusion, his inconsistency, and the fact that a lot of these so-called statements were really responses to leading closed-ended questions after he'd been in a room, not moving, not gesticulating, not changing his voice for hours.
We're going to get back to that interview, but I'd like to talk about neuroimaging. What is neuroimaging?
So that is when people are able to use things like MRIs or CAT scans to see.
Okay, so I'm going to skip past the what is neuroimaging. I think she's also going to explain her history with working with individuals with schizophrenia as well. All right.
Patients who would only eat food that was unopened. Have you ever seen anything similar to that?
Yes, and when I've seen it, it's been related to paranoia, often that they're worried that something has been done to the food, and so they only trust it if it's in an unopened package.
Now, when I use the term obsessive compulsive behavior, what does that phrase mean?
So obsessive compulsive behavior is when people are doing things and they keep doing them over and over again, and as an observer, it doesn't make sense to you. Like there's no rhyme or reason as to why they're doing this thing. Now, people with obsessive compulsive personality disorders, it's because they're tying this behavior to some thought and it's not rational. With people who have schizophrenia, it could be that it's related to paranoia or some delusion, but it's just not something that you are aware of because it's something that is strictly in their head.
And a repetitive routine that a person with schizophrenia does over and over again, could that be considered obsessive compulsive type behavior?
It could be considered compulsive behavior. Whether it's obsessive or not would just depend on whether it is an obsession driving it or something that's a delusion.
What's the difference between obsessive and compulsive? I combine those two words, but could you explain?
So the obsession is the thought and the compulsion is the action.
All right. And so there are a few really good questions. So we are taking a look at the case of Carlos Dominguez. He was charged with first degree capital M because two individuals died as a result. So the jury found him not guilty of first degree capital M. He's likely going to be retried. They have a case update on July 27th, I believe, where the state is going to determine what they do next. I wouldn't be surprised if they offered some type of plea deal, or they might completely retry the case. But there was one surviving victim, and she did testify in this case, and so my heart really does go out to the individuals that lost their lives and their families, and then also the surviving victim too. And he was not diagnosed prior to this. Nobody was aware that he was hearing voices and seeing things. He started to have some issues at school. So he was a college student, I believe UC Davis. I could be wrong, but he was a college student. Before this, he had been very successful, was a very resilient person. And then maybe, and then things started to kind of go downhill. Uh, he, um, he was placed on medication once he was incarcerated, and they realized that he was experiencing psychosis. Okay, let's keep it going.
So it may just be compulsion. They're doing repetitive act for unknown reasons.
The compulsion could be tied to a delusion. So if I'm afraid that the government can read my thoughts and I'm putting tinfoil on the windows, the obsession is the government can read my thoughts. The compulsion is tinfoil on the windows.
Dr. Benson, what does the term Florida psychosis mean?
It's just a way of signaling that someone is very actively psychotic, that this is a severe form of the illness that is in a largely untreated, or if not completely untreated state.
When we use the term Florida psychosis versus active psychosis, do they have essentially the same meaning?
They do, but florid is, again, indicating that it is like severe, because some people with schizophrenia, especially those who have had it for a long time, develop ways to go through life and deal with the voices and that sort of thing. So they could be actively psychotic, but still quite functional. Usually, if you're talking about someone with florid psychosis, they are significantly impaired. They're not able to go about their usual activities of living, and people who know them see a difference in them.
But the fact that a person with florid psychosis is able to complete some everyday tasks, such as selecting food at a grocery store, logging onto a computer, attending a class, turning on your cell phone. The fact that someone is able to accomplish those basic tasks, does that mean they're not in a state of florid psychosis?
You can absolutely have florid psychosis and still do things, especially things that are overlearned behaviors or things that you've done over and over again. So you've turned on a computer, you've turned on your phone, you've gone grocery shopping many, many times. So even if you have people who have brain injuries or maybe even early stages of dementia, right, they can still do those sorts of things. It's not that there's nothing wrong with their brain, but it's that they've just had so much practice and repetition doing that over time.
If a person is in a state of florid psychosis, can they still have periods when their speech, thoughts, and behavior is not as disorganized as it is at other times? In other words,
wait, can you slow down just a little, please? Sorry.
if a person is in a state of florid psychosis, I do it too. If a person is in a state of florid psychosis, can they still have periods of time when their speech, thoughts, behavior is not as disorganized as it is at other times? In other words, for a few minutes, they may have a somewhat rational conversation, and then it deteriorates. You understand my question?
Yes, and it is possible, especially if you're talking about things that are concrete or right in front of them, are not complicated, or you're asking close-ended questions, yes, no, right? It's easy enough to look like you're okay in certain circumstances.
How does active psychosis impact perception and memory?
So when someone is psychotic and they are out of touch with reality, their ability to store what is happening in the moment is going to be compromised, right? And so if you can't store it correctly in the first place, it's going to make it hard to go back and retrieve it and understand it or make sense of it later.
And so what he describes happened is that once he was more stable, he was able to kind of go back, and those things that he thought were shadow people, he then realized, no, that those were actual people. And that the voices, because a person that is actively psychotic, especially if this is their first experience, they may not realize that what they're sensing and experiencing is not real. And until a person can actively believe what they're experiencing is real. And that's why if I'm working with somebody that's having command auditory hallucinations, where there are voices telling them to do things, or there are voices, I immediately look at safety and getting them assessed and seeing about immediate interventions. All right. So and it sounds like he had whispers, like this had been escalating over a period of time. It didn't the first psychotic break he had wasn't this incident. He had been experiencing psychosis according to his report. And so we're just going by what he's saying. But then on this day, this is what he's saying happened. Okay.
And you're using the terms psychotic or psychosis. What do those terms mean?
So when you talk about someone being psychotic, there's some separation between what they're experiencing and what is reality.
After someone is treated for psychosis, placed on medication, how can that impact their memory?
So when we talk about memory, we're not just talking about what somebody has in their head. We're also talking about their ability to retrieve that information, articulate it, and communicate it to you. And when someone is actively psychotic and untreated, every step of that is going to be harder to do. As they get treated and their thoughts are more organized, they can speak more, they can put thoughts together themselves, they may be better able to tell you about things that happened in the past. There could still be gaps, but at least their brain at that point is able to put two and two together in a way that it couldn't before.
Once a person is stabilized on medication, how are they able to distinguish between what memories were hallucinations or delusions and what may have been reality?
So over time, as people are treated, as they go through therapy, as they get feedback about what a hallucination is, what a delusion is, as they get feedback and more understanding about their diagnosis, they develop what is called insight. And that is their ability to recognize and understand what has been going on with them. Initially, it's not something that you expect people to have. And some people develop it, some people don't, and people develop it to varying degrees. But if someone is treated, as they get better, in retrospect, they know the government couldn't look in my house and the tinfoil wasn't doing anything. But in the moment, they didn't know that, right? So as they're treated, as they get more in touch with reality, between that, the psychoeducation that happens in the treatment process, and the fact that their own thoughts are more coherent, they can understand more.
Do some people with schizophrenia, even after being medicated for a substantial period of time, not express much emotion, visibly express emotion?
Yes. So with schizophrenia, the negative symptoms, and by negative, things that should be there but that are not, our medications just aren't as good at treating the negative symptoms. And so we can really effectively often treat hallucinations, paranoia, delusions, but that doesn't mean that someone's completely back to their baseline or their normal selves, or that they're.
And sometimes those medications, so in treating clients, sometimes those medications kind of can make, for some individuals, it can make them tired, and it can make them almost even more flat. And so I just like to share that part. Somebody wanted me to clarify what was the event that led to what happened, and he was just riding his bike in the park, and he says that he started seeing shadow people, and I think, and it sounds like he thought he was attacking the shadow people, but they were real people. And so that's what they say happened. Okay. All right. Negative symptoms is flat affect, that lack of emotional expression. I think she's going to go into it. Negative symptoms, um, diminished emotional expression, reduced speech. Sometimes they don't speak as much. Lack of motivation, social withdrawal, and an inability to experience pleasure, and anhedonia. So things a person used to enjoy, not doing those things. So a person that used to love watching TV, now they just sit in a room staring at a wall all day. All right. Anhedonia is common in just depression in general, but it can also be a negative symptom that's found within schizophrenia. Okay.
Completely functioning without any deficits. The ones that are stickier for us, that are harder for us to treat, and that also are associated with greater impairments in function, actually, in the long term, are the negative ones, the things that should be there that are not. Their brain isn't thinking as quickly as it was before. They don't produce as much speech. They're not as expressive. They're not as interested in relationships. And those things can persist even if medication is working, even if somebody is compliant and doing everything that they are being asked of by their providers.
So does the fact that someone who's medicated doesn't express emotion, does that mean they don't care and they don't feel any emotion?
Not at all. What that means, or what that can mean, is that the disease, the disorder, is getting in the way of that emotion showing up in a way that you can recognize it. Because we're all trained to recognize emotions in people who, for the most part, don't have disorders like this. And so what can happen is that lack of emotional expression can be misinterpreted as disinterest or a lack of remorse or callousness, when it really is that the illness just doesn't allow them that full range of expressivity.
You already spoke about your observations of the negative symptoms that Mr. Reales Dominguez met with him in August of 2024. At that point, did you personally observe any positive symptoms that Mr. Reales Dominguez was exhibiting after being on medication for 1 year?
Not at that time.
In reviewing the materials, the witness statements, and the prior testimony, what symptoms of schizophrenia did you find evidence for basically in the 2 years leading up to the charged offenses and during that same period?
So there were hallucinations, there were delusions, there was disorganized behavior, and there were negative symptoms as well.
And we went through a bunch of negative symptoms. Would it be fair to say that Mr. Reales Dominguez was exhibiting multiple negative symptoms of schizophrenia? Would that be a correct statement?
Yes.
Dr. Vinson, what is the term malingering? What does that mean?
Malingering is when someone is either making up mental health symptoms or exaggerating them for external gain. And that external gain could be money, like in a civil suit, or it could be trying to get out of trouble in a criminal case.
In your clinical interview, did you see any evidence of malingering?
No. And in fact, Mr. Dominguez has certainly developed more insight over time, it appears, in reading his records. But there are still things that he does not fully grasp about his illness, about its impact on him. So if anything, he underreports rather than overreporting or exaggerating anything.
The fact that Mr. Reales Dominguez is on medication and his positive symptoms are under control, does that mean he no longer has schizophrenia?
He still has schizophrenia, and schizophrenia is one of the diagnoses that, if you meet criteria, most of the time it's a diagnosis that you will carry. It's not like depression, where as long as the symptoms go away, you no longer have it, or it's not on your chart anymore. Because of some of the long-term impacts you see with schizophrenia, it's one that is thought of as a chronic illness. And
except for extremely rare cases where a person with schizophrenia is in remission without medication, is Mr. Reales Dominguez have to take medication for the rest of his life?
In most cases, you do anticipate that medications will be required for a long, long time.
So is medication a cure?
It's not curative, it just treats.
I'd like to talk about the recordings you observed. Let's start with the recording of the 7-hour interview.
All right. So that's why we watch clips of the 7-hour interrogation, because she's going to pick up on a few of the things that, that's why I wanted to show y'all a brief clip of that interrogation. At one point he was offered something to drink and he said no. And even the person asking him questions was like, wow, like you've been in here for a while. Like, I'm surprised you don't want to eat or drink anything. He probably just wanted to go home, but.
Before we get to that, what is suggestibility? What does that term mean to you?
Suggestibility is when someone is able to shape your response by how they ask the question, or maybe because of a power dynamic between people.
Why is suggestibility important in the setting of someone who's being interviewed by police?
So it's in an interview, you're trying to get accurate information, but someone who is at a power differential may want to just give information that they think the person in power wants to hear. So if you have somebody who is sick and is struggling, who is at a disadvantage because of age or because these people have a badge and a uniform and I don't, what you can have is that they start answering things in a way that they think the person wants to hear. So it goes from being what is truthfully that person's experience or their perceptions to saying yes to closed-ended questions and things like that.
Did you observe evidence of suggestibility in the police interview with Detectives Ramos and Mustardini?
Yes.
What did you observe?
There were multiple times where when they would ask him the question in an open-ended way, he didn't respond, or he would respond saying that he didn't do something. But when they asked the question again in a closed-ended way or repeated the question, then he would say yes or something like that.
And in your experience, do people with schizophrenia often find themselves in the criminal justice system for various reasons?
So there's absolutely an overrepresentation of people with serious and persistent mental illness like schizophrenia in the criminal justice system.
Do you think it's important for police officers and law enforcement to be educated on the symptoms of schizophrenia? Do you think that's important?
I think it would certainly be helpful given the overrepresentation.
Now, anything else about, in terms of suggestibility, the interview with Detective Mustardini and Detective Ramos that stands out to you?
So Mr. Reales Dominguez did not ask for water or food or a bathroom break for a very long time. And as you go on in a room where you don't have breaks or basic things you need, right, you're going to be more vulnerable to things like suggestibility, potentially.
What other symptoms, either positive or negative, did you see watching that more than 7-hour interview?
So there was a lack of emotional expression. There was a lack of hand gestures. You did not see his posture move. There were many times when he was asked questions and he seemed as if he was trying to cooperate. So everything they asked him to do, whether it was taking a swab or using his fingers for printing, like he cooperated. But you could see that there were times when he was asked questions and he just didn't respond. And it seemed as if that was interpreted as, him willfully holding things back. When, as a mental health professional, I observed that as his brain just couldn't really generate the answers, which is why he could say yes or no or okay when somebody kind of spoon fed him.
And that's when we mentioned the confusion during some of those questions. He seemed genuinely confused at times.
Information. But when he was asked to spontaneously come up with answers on his own, he really struggled. And there were a lot of pauses, a lot of silences, a lot of times where he didn't respond to open-ended questions.
When you communicated or met with Mr. Reales Dominguez for 3 hours in August of 2024, is that how he verbally communicated?
Oh, he was much more able to tell me about things during my interview with him than he was during that interview.
Now, was this evidence, in your opinion, of disorganized thoughts, disorganized behavior?
It was evidence of that thought disorder that he had and what we call poverty of thought, which is it's just not there. So if he had disorganized thoughts, he couldn't articulate them for me to pick them up. But what I saw was that he really seemed to be trying to cooperate. And when it came to more mechanical things where he could cooperate, he did. But he just had a hard time putting words together.
I'd like to assume some facts about that interview. I'd like to assume that he told the officers his mom's name was Barbara and spelled it V-A-R-L-A, where her name is Carla. I'd like to assume that he told the officers he went to Castlemont High School, which he did, but he spelled it Castlement with an E instead of Castlemont. I'd like you to assume that he had given the address of 782 Hawthorne when it was actually he lived at 762 Hawthorne. Also, ask you to assume that he gave an email that was either accurate or close to accurate. He may have been versed with a couple of letters. It was an email based on the name Carlos Reales Dominguez. Assume that he gave his correct phone number, but he said his phone wasn't active.
Okay, so I'm going to skip ahead just a little bit. to around 30. Okay. All right. So let's
figuring things out for himself in a lot of ways.
But did that independent nature that he developed, did that in any ways make him more susceptible to not getting help when he became ill?
So I think that was one of the contributors. As someone who was always, what he described to me was being self-conscious about his immigration status and what that can mean for him. He had to be careful about who he talked to and who he told what, and that was how he went through his entire life here. So that was a piece of it. He also was someone who had been pretty successful at figuring things out without a lot of help and on his own. He'd gotten some help from people in high school, but had really navigated quite well a lot of different places and systems. And so he rightfully so, I think, had confidence in his ability to figure things out. The other element of this is that because the brain is the affected organ, that's the brain that would help you observe, that would help you know that something's wrong, and it was impacted. And so it can be very hard for people, especially with a first break, where this is the first time happening and they haven't been down this road before, to know what's happening in real time.
Now, Dr. Vincent, I just want to discuss the records you reviewed. You reviewed records from multiple psychiatrists at Atascadero State Hospital.
Yes.
And you've already testified. You reviewed the testimony and notes from Dr. Patricia Tyler.
Yes.
You reviewed a report from a neuropsychologist, Dr. Dale Watson.
Yes.
And you reviewed the report from Dr. Sheila Weiner.
Yes.
You also reviewed a report from Dr. Serentic Reed, a forensic psychologist.
Yes.
And just clarify, what is the jury's heard the word used interchangeably yesterday. What is the difference between psychology?
So we already know the difference between a psychologist and psychiatrist. Psychologists go to, we have doctoral education, either a PhD or a PsyD, and psychiatrists go to medical school. And yes, all right. But she's going to be asked, she's going to go into just how all the mental health professionals, like none of the mental health professionals thought he was faking it or thought he did not meet criteria for schizophrenia.
A psychiatrist, an OBGYN, pediatrician, but your specialty training occurs during residency. So after medical school, you choose which specialty you're going to go into, and then you do psychiatric residency training. So I did, in my case, 6 years of training in psychiatry specifically after medical school, and that entailed clinical care, psychotherapy, psychopharmacology, coursework, and getting supervised by people who are more senior than I am.
And psychologists often do some testing that psychiatrists may not do as frequently.
Yes.
So is it valuable to read reports from both psychiatrists and psychologists who have evaluated Mr. Reales Dominguez?
It is helpful. And I would also add social workers and people who, are just treating people in a facility. So the social workers at the jail, their reports and observations were really important as well.
Having reviewed all those reports, all the people who have examined Mr. Reales Dominguez, does anything stand out to you?
Yes.
What is that?
The convergence of opinions about what was going on with this young man, that people consistently saw that he had a psychotic disorder, that he was severely ill, and especially early on, that he didn't understand what was going on and needed medication. I have, I'd say this is probably my 6th or 7th NGRI case, and I have never seen this kind of convergence on a case before, where everyone agrees that we are looking at someone who is in an active state of psychosis.
And by convergence, you mean you have multiple experts and they all agree?
And not just experts, right? Because sometimes people can undermine or look sideways at experts because they are getting paid, right? The people in the jail who weren't on one side or the other, the people in the state hospital who weren't on one side or the other, all saw that this young man had schizophrenia or a schizophrenia type disorder.
And how many NGRI cases have you worked on in your career?
I'd estimate at least 6 or 7.
And of all those cases, you have not seen as much convergence as you have in this case.
Not like this case.
Dr. Vinson, I want to ask you a few final questions. In your expert opinion, based on everything you reviewed, was Mr. Reales Dominguez in a state of florid psychosis at the time of the charged offenses in this case?
Yes, he was.
In your opinion, was he, at the time of the charged offenses, experiencing hallucinations, delusions, and disorganized thoughts and behavior?
Yes, he was.
And in your opinion, did these hallucinations, delusions, and disorganized thoughts and behavior substantially impact his perception of reality and his thought processes at the time of the charged offenses?
Yes, it did.
I have nothing further. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hutchinson. That was direct examination. Mr. Vanderhook, cross.
Examination.
Good afternoon.
So the state did during, because the defendant in this case did testify, so the state was able to cross-examine him. We do not have time to watch that today, but what I will tell you is that the state asked him questions about, you were actually angry. You did this because you were angry. And he said, no. I think he had a breakup with a girlfriend, not right around this time, but leading up to this event. And so the state is going to bring up some concerns they have. And so I do think the state feels that he's guilty of, but it's up to the jury. So, all right, let's keep it going.
You mentioned a medication that Mr. Dominguez is taking during the wreck. You said olanzapine.
Yes.
And what are the side effects?
So she said, because they said Zyprexa, so I wonder if that's, yeah. Olanzapine is the generic of Zyprexa. Right.
Effects of olanzapine?
It can have side effects of sedation. It can also cause dysregulation in blood sugar, blood cholesterol, weight gain, things like that.
Can be associated with improvements in verbal memory.
Say that again?
Can be associated with improvements in verbal memory.
So if someone had difficulty remembering things because of untreated schizophrenia and the olanzapine treats the schizophrenia, then yes. If you give it to somebody who doesn't have schizophrenia, it's not going to improve their memory.
It can have impairment effects on spatial memory and executive functioning.
What?
So spatial awareness would be like visual spatial. So like, and okay, but he's okay. Yeah. Okay.
What's your question?
Olanzapine, can it impair a person's spatial memory and executive function?
So again, it's going to depend, right? So if you have someone who, because of their illness, has deficits in those issues, it could make those things better. If you have someone who doesn't have those issues because of their illness, but they're sedated by the medication, then it could make those things worse.
What's delta-9 THC?
Delta-9 THC?
Yes.
So marijuana, is that what you're asking about?
I'm asking about the compound delta-9 THC. What does it have to do with cannabis?
Objection off the scope.
Sustain.
So like I said, I did not watch every second of this trial, so I don't know if something about cannabis came up in this case.
Doctor, as part of your job, is it necessary that you're familiar with effects of certain compounds on the human body?
Yes.
And did you review reports related to different chemical compounds?
Objection, facts not evidence.
His defense was very quick to object. Okay. The state I did not hear a lot of objections from the state in this case. The defense was on it with their objections from the pieces that I watched.
Sustain.
Doctor, you wrote in your report the different things that you reviewed as part of your evaluation, correct?
Yes.
And on the list, as number 24, you reviewed a toxicology report, correct?
Let me just refresh my memory. Yes.
All right, and it discusses delta-9 THC, right?
I don't remember.
If it did, is that important?
Okay, so the role that THC could have, like that's okay. So like I said, I did not watch every second of this case. So there is a substance induced psychosis, but when you're off the substances, for some individuals, it goes away. I've also worked with some people that got where a substance induced psychosis that never went away. Yes. Okay.
If it was relevant to my opinion, I would have included it in the report.
So, so then you don't believe that report is relevant to your opinion?
If it was relevant to my opinion, I would have included it in the report.
Is it included in your report?
No.
It's also very common for individuals with mental health diagnoses to attempt to use substances to cope. And so if the psychosis was present before the substance, then it wouldn't be a substance induced psychosis. It would just be schizophrenia. And that's probably what she's not saying, but
So, first questioning about different theories of what causes schizophrenia, what leads to schizophrenia. Do you remember that?
Yes.
There's talk about fringe theories or crackpot theories and that sort of thing. Do you remember that?
I don't know that he used the word crackpot, but I do remember fringe.
All right. And are you familiar with the biopsychosocial model?
everybody is.
Yes.
And what is that?
So it is a way of thinking about illness and health, really, where you are considering biological aspects of who somebody is, psychological aspects, so their self-concept, the way they deal with stress, their coping mechanisms, and social things, so things going on in their lived environment and that are around them.
So this model has more of an emphasis on social factors, correct?
Not more. I wouldn't say it has more of an emphasis. Like that's just an aspect of it. It's a holistic approach, I think.
More compared to what?
The diathesis stress model.
No, that's not correct.
Are they the same model then?
They're not the same model, but I would not say that one has more of an emphasis or the other, both of them included.
So, but they're different models that different people use, correct?
They're different models, but they're not that distinct, actually.
Despite being a different model, is it fringe?
Okay, so we have to go back because they mentioned something that we didn't talk about. So the diathesis stress model is that there's a vulnerability, a pre-existing vulnerability, and a stressful life event can create. So the diathesis is the person's predisposition or vulnerability to develop a specific mental health disorder, which can be biological, so genetic or psychological, and then stress is the impact that stress has on it. And so let's do that versus the biopsychosocial model. All right. So the biopsychosocial model takes a broader view, considering biological, social, and psychological factors that are interconnected influences on mental health. And so let's see what's the main difference. So diathesis stress is more specific, focuses on interconnection of vulnerability and stress. Biopsychosocial is just a broader framework. But I wouldn't say that one focuses more on the social aspect more than the other. It's a compliment that Dr. Vincent reminds you all of me. I really liked her testimony, and that's why I wanted to share it. She's one of my new favorite experts. Like she really did a phenomenal job.
The biopsychosocial model?
Yeah.
No.
And are you familiar with the neurodevelopmental model?
Yes.
is that a fringe model?
No.
Okay.
So they're just different, like, that's fine. But so they're just different ways. They're just different frameworks of describing kind of how people like, yeah, they're just different frameworks.
What is that?
So that is the idea that how the brain is developing or growing is what is going to result in the issues that you see with their mental health. Now, I will make it clear that it's not as if you can't have one or the other, right? So the neurodevelopmental aspect of it can be incorporated into the biological part of the biopsychosocial. So again, they're not as distinct as some might make you believe.
And so, but it's a separate model than the diathesis stress model?
Again, there are similar elements there. So with the diathesis stress model, you're looking at kind of what that individual person brings into a situation, and their developmental contexts and issues are part of what they're bringing into the situation.
Right. And so there are some psychiatrists that would adhere to the neurodevelopmental model, and some that might adhere to the biopsychosocial model, and some that might adhere to the diathesis stress model, and none of them would be fringe, correct?
Can you say? I'm sorry.
I don't know if that's the judge. I think the judge, I think that's the poor court reporter trying to keep up with him.
We've talked about 3 different models. Psychiatrists could adhere to any one of those models and not be fringe, correct?
What I would say is that most people understand that there is overlap and synergy between those models and don't operate out of a pure, we only use this one and we don't think about the other ones.
Yes.
Right. And are you familiar with second hit theory?
No.
Yeah, I don't know that one either.
Are you familiar with the theory that talks about having early developmental trauma and late developmental trauma, and that having both early and later developmental trauma can lead to increased risk for schizophrenia?
Yeah.
I wonder why the state is bringing that part up. We'll see there, because that would almost be proving that he has schizophrenia. I just don't understand why the state's going there, but it's okay.
Yes. Now, I will say that goes back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of adverse childhood experiences, multiple traumas. Again, sometimes people call things different things, but it's basically the same concept.
All right. And so if someone adopted that, would they be fringe?
Again, I don't know who this someone is or what else they're putting with it, but the element of the more traumas you have, the higher your risk is something that is generally accepted.
Right. And under the diathesis stress model, it talks about factors that are believed to contribute to causing schizophrenia, correct?
So again, we are not in a place where we can say this one thing is the cause. What we can say is when people have these things happen to them or these things are part of their life, their risk goes up. But it's not as if everyone who has this one experience ends up developing schizophrenia.
All right, so the diathesis stress talks about a genetic predisposition combined with stressors as being something that creates risk for developing schizophrenia.
Or other conditions, yes.
And there are some people that have both the genetic predisposition and stress and never develop schizophrenia, correct?
Well, again, it's increased risk. So it's not, you're absolutely going to have it, but the risk goes up. So we understand that there aren't just risk factors, there are also protective factors. And so some people may have a lot of risk factors, but may also have protective factors that mitigate the risk from those factors.
And there are some people that have no risk factors that do ultimately develop schizophrenia, correct?
No risk factors?
It's hard to say no risk factors.
Yeah, because I know risk factors, like, yeah, because normally there's genetic, there would be something. It would be hard to say no risk factors.
But I will say there are some people who have fewer identified risk factors who end up developing it.
Right, and so all of these are models that people use to talk about schizophrenia, but we don't truly know with certainty what causes schizophrenia, correct?
We cannot pinpoint an exact cause, correct?
And so with respect to your testimony, do you maintain a website where you post about the services that you offer?
Yes.
And is one of the claims made on that website that your examinations and your evaluations can withstand any cross-examination?
I don't think that I said that.
Okay, is that a claim that's made on the website though?
Again, I don't think I said that. Now, I may have had an attorney who hired me who hired me say that as feedback about me. But again, I don't think that.
That was probably a review. I wonder. That was hilarious. So, but before you go up and testify, you have to check out your website, make sure everything's accurate. You have to make sure. I wonder if that was a review that or a testimonial that somebody gave. Her testimony is strong, I think, and I think she's doing a really good job on cross-examination.
I say that.
The website doesn't say that you provide opinions that will withstand the scrutiny of cross-examination?
That's not the question that you asked.
Okay, does your website say that?
It does say that.
Okay, thank you. And there was a question about payment and how much you're being paid.
So I skipped that part, okay, because she was asked to review things and it sounded like the state wanted her to review them for free, okay? So we're going to have to go back to that part because I didn't realize. So we're at 4603. We have to go back to when she was asked to review something and she had to clarify her fee because you can tell like she is about her business and I love it.
Now, ma'am, when you review body cameras or reports, do you charge an hourly rate?
Yes.
At some point, did Mr. Vanderhook from the district attorney's office reach out to you in April of this year by email and ask you to consider other materials?
Yes.
And did he want you to consider other materials for you to review them?
Yes.
Did he offer to pay you to review those materials?
No.
What did he say about payment in his email to you?
What I remember is him verifying that I wasn't charging him.
So he wanted you to do it for free?
I'm not sure what he wanted, but he didn't offer to pay for it.
Did Mr. Vanderhook, did you agree to accept materials from Mr. Vanderhook?
Yes.
And the defense ended up paying for it. Okay. So in order to understand where that was about to go, we had to go back to that moment. Okay. I skipped that part. I did not realize that it was going to come up later. Okay. What was the background behind it? So Chris, I see your question. I don't understand. Lisa asking about the name of the person. I was going to try to look for it. I know I covered it. And so I'm going to try, and I'm so bad with names. You can't get, no, yeah. So it wasn't Carly. I don't think it was because it was college student. So Carly was in high school. Sydney Powell, I believe. Yes. Y'all are the best. Yes. I believe it was, Sydney Powell. Okay. And she did things to like cover up the crime. So he didn't do anything, to my knowledge, to try to like he was still wearing the bloody sweatshirt. Like he didn't seem to do anything to cover or hide. And so that's where if I was on the jury, it did seem like he was disconnected from reality and didn't fully realize that what he was doing was wrong. Her conviction was overturned. I forget if she's going to be retried, but yeah. All right. So let's go back to this part.
Yes. Now, I will say that goes back to what we were talking about earlier.
I think we were at 43. I'm going to go back. I'm going to go forward a little bit because it might have been 4403 where he was getting into payment.
And never developed schizophrenia, correct?
Well, again, it's increased risk. So it's not your
Okay. So we weren't at, this was a little bit further.
up developing it.
Right. And so all of these are models that people use.
Okay. So I must have got the time a little off.
And so it should be about 80 by the time that you're done with this testimony.
Okay.
That's cross-examination. your examinations and your evaluations can withstand any cross-examination?
I don't think that I said that.
Okay, is that a claim that's made on the website though?
Again, I don't think I said that. Now, I may have had an attorney who hired me who hired me say that as feedback about me. But again, I don't think that I say that.
The website doesn't say that you provide opinions that will withstand scrutiny of cross-examination?
That's not the question that you asked.
Okay, does your website say that?
It does say that.
Okay, thank you. And there was a question about payment and how much you're being paid. How much are you being paid?
$500 an hour.
And by the end of your work, can you give a prediction with any degree of accuracy of how many total hours you will have done for this case?
It's been about 80 so far.
And so it should be about 80 by the time that you're done with this testimony?
I think so.
Okay, so I'd like to talk to you about the things that you relied on in forming your opinion. You have a bibliography of the different things that you referenced, correct?
So I included the materials that I received for this case, but I also make it a point to say, and it's in my report, that I rely on 6 years of training after medical school, being in this field for 12 years at this point, all of my CME, all of my courses, all of my...
All right. And so I thought she did a phenomenal job. The rest of this, I have all the links down in the description if you all want to dig a little deeper into the case. As I mentioned, so this was the case of very, very sad case because the victims the surviving victim and the families, they may go through another trial because the jury was not able to come to a unanimous verdict. I believe it was 10-2 on one of the other charges, but they were not able to all agree on any of the other charges. The only thing they all agreed on was not guilty for first degree murder. And so if the state does decide to retry, I would imagine that they might consider a plea deal. I don't know. I think the but I don't know what the defense is going to say. He is at risk for deportation, and in El Salvador, because I wanted to search what resources were available there. Sometimes finding mental health care, especially in more rural areas, can be difficult, and so I do hope that he does continue his treatment wherever he goes. He's currently incarcerated and able to receive his medication. Some prisons give access to therapy, and so, like I said, I just thought this was an interesting case. Thank you to the psych nerd that recommended it. I did dye my hair, so this is the random part of this part. I took off my filter because it's a little blonder than it looked. I really like it. This was what I was going for last time I dyed it. But I forgot to add the intensity packet. And so I remembered this time. And so I really like it. That is that. Yeah, so that's where that's where his family is from. And he may, depending on what happens with this case, and um because he was brought here as a child, and so we will see what happens. um but once again, my heart goes out to the victims. He may end up in treatment because one of the options is if somebody is found not guilty by reason of insanity, then they end up in a state prison for a period of time. He could be found guilty of manslaughter or second degree capital M. And then he could be incarcerated. I do not know what's going to happen next. All right. So yes. And then somebody mentioned um, schizophrenia are individuals with schizophrenia are most likely to be victims of violence rather than perpetrators. Yes, they have delusions and more, but they are scared. And he describes that. He describes when he was paranoid, feeling afraid. When he saw the shadows, when he heard the voice, he describes being afraid. And so I do hope that he continues his treatment, and I do just my heart goes out to the victims' families and to the surviving victim. This Saturday, I am doing. I'm speaking at that event on Saturday. If something major happens, I might go live either on Friday or I might go live on Sunday. So just keep an eye out. And if there is a case that you all would like for me to take a look at, make sure to mention it in the regular comments. And I will see y'all next time. I hope y'all have a good one. Bye.